That I see, but this I sew. British Isles, Scotland. In the Scottish town of Bewley there was once a tailor, Sandy, who worked very hard, but he couldn't manage to put enough coins aside to get married. It happened that the girl he loved, Flora, was also desired by Angus, who was a well-to-do farmer, but Flora wanted no part of Angus or his promises of riches and a grand house. She loved Sandy, and that was that. She would wait until he had put enough by for them to wed, and she put aside what she earned as a lady's maid so that she could marry her dearie all the sooner. Now, there was the shell of a church nearby. During a feud between two powerful clans, it had been set on fire by the Macdonalds when it had been full of Mackenzies. Not a single Mackenzie had escaped. Since that time, the church was said to be haunted, and no one would go near it after sunset. One day, Angus went to Sandy's tailor's shop on the pretence of having a shirt mended. As Sandy plied his needle, the two men chatted, and Angus brought the talk around to Sandy's lack of money to wed Flora. "Just what would you be willing to do to get the money?" asked Angus. "Anything," answered Sandy. "Well then," said Angus slyly, "I'll give you what you need if you'll spend as much of the night alone in the old church as it takes to sew me a new pair of trousers." Now, Sandy knew all the stories about the ruined church being haunted by strange creatures, but his love for Flora was so strong that he agreed on the spot to what Angus proposed. "Then," said Angus, "settle yourself in the church on the stroke of midnight, and when you've made the trousers, bring them to my door. I'll pay you for your sewing and your courage." Angus sounded cheerful enough, but he secretly hoped that something terrible would happen to the tailor, so that he would be rid of his rival for fair Flora's heart. Shortly before midnight, the brave tailor arrived at the church. First he tested the door to be sure it would close. Then he pried loose the latch on the inside of the door, leaving the outside latch as it was. This way, the door could be drawn shut from the outside, but not pulled open from the inside. He left the door ajar. Inside, the fire-blackened stone walls were pierced with tall, narrow windows, barely wide enough for a man's fist to fit through. Moonlight shone down through a hole where the centre of the roof had fallen in, but it gave scant light. The tailor settled himself in one of the pews near the door, lit a tallow candle, and began to sew. The wavering flame sent shadows dancing all around him. At first, all was quiet. Then, as the stroke of midnight tolled, the tailor gasped. Leaning toward him out of the darkness was a great fleshless skull with grinning jaws and sockets without eyes. In a horrible, hoarse voice, the bony jaws rasped, "Seest thou this big grey skull, O tailor?" "That I see, but this I sew," replied the terrified little man as he bravely went on sewing. "Seest thou this long, grizzled throat without food, O tailor?" demanded the thing, as more of its ghastly self appeared. "That I see, but this I sew," answered the tailor. Indeed, he was now sewing frantically. "Seest thou this long, grizzled trunk without food, O tailor?" questioned the skull. It was drawing nearer, and Sandy could see more of the horrible shape now. "That I see, but this I sew," said the tailor, as well as he could through his chattering teeth. "Seest thou this long, grizzled thigh without food, O tailor?" said the haunter, stepping fully into the candlelight. "That I see, but this I sew," said Sandy. Indeed, he needed only 3 or 4 more stitches to complete the trousers. But the skeletal thing was now towering over him. The moonlight through the ruined roof made its bones shine so brightly that Sandy couldn't look at it directly. The tailor's hands were shaking so he feared he couldn't finish his work. "Seest thou this long grizzled arm without food, O tailor?" growled the creature of bone and light. It raised its massive dead hands skyward with a loud rattle. With trembling hands the tailor took his last stitch and bit off the end of his thread. At that instant the thing stretched out its bony hand to seize him. Through its fleshless jaws it bellowed, "Seest thou this great grizzled paw without food, O tailor?" But Sandy, gripping the newly made trousers in his hand, sprang to his feet and raced to the door of the church. Before he got through it, the skeleton fingers caught at his leg, the nails raking the back of it painfully. Then Sandy was outside and had pulled the door closed behind him. As he leaned against the sealed portal, he heard the fumblings of the thing as, unable to find the missing latch, it began to scrape and scratch at the wood. But the tailor was already racing for Angus's home. Sandy presented himself to Angus, demanding payment of their wager. But Angus denied that Sandy had gone to the church. When Sandy showed the scratches on his leg, Angus claimed he had scraped himself with briars. They exchanged heated words. Finally, a group of townsfolk, hearing the tailor's story and Angus's challenge, went to investigate the church. They found deep scratches and dents that splintered the wood on the inside of the door, and that could only have been made by the haunter Sandy had described. So Angus was made to pay the tailor what he had promised, and was given the trousers that had cost him so dearly. Then Sandy and Flora were married and lived happily ever after. But to the end of his days, Sandy bore faint scars across the back of one leg, where the bony fingers of the thing had scraped his flesh.